Hey everybody, welcome back to another video on this channel. And yes, this is the video that was delayed last video because of technical issues on my side. So no worries, we start straight away with unstorage and useStorage in Nitro. Let's go. As said before, once again, sorry for the delay, but the video is coming, well, out now without technical issues. And I hope you enjoyed last week's stream VOD. Where I started building an association manager application. If not, take a look at that. Also, there will be a few more coming over the next weeks. So I streamed a few more times and maybe will if I find the time to get that application up and running. But that's not the topic of the video today. Also not the topic is my talk with Julian Huang about server components in the last Deja Vu episode, while Michael is still on paternity leave. No, today we talk about useStorage and unstorage in Nitro. And maybe some of you have heard about it already. Maybe some of you use it already even. Yes, Nitro and also Nuxt, they have a way to integrate with various key value stores, be it in memory or use a file system. You could even say you use an API with just HTTP calls and GitHub repositories and more. So the idea is, let's have a look at how that integration layer looks like, what we can integrate with, and what's actually useful for, right? Maybe what's also Nuxt and Nitro make use of it under the hood. So let's dive into it. As usual, our demo application is minimal. You know that we have an app.view with nothing in here except let's go, and our nuxt.config that just contains, well, you know, the typical black background, white font. So we don't see the light mode that much. So if we start an application and switch to the browser, well, we see what we would assume to see. Very simple, a tiny let's go. So let's get started. What do we want to do? Well, if we jump back to the code, it would be nice to try out the useStorage composable. And as we said, it comes from Nitro. It would be nice to create a new file and server. Let's say API storage.ts. And in here, we want to do some things. Let's create a Nitro event handler and write down what we actually want to do. So the main idea would be is, let's say we, first of all, save some value, let's say current date string, to a file. So the storage. I think that would be the easiest. We could even say, you know what, let's start with just the storage and let's do the memory. And then we say, okay, you know what, after a certain time, let's say 30 seconds, or let's do 5 seconds for the sake of the video, refresh, quote unquote, the data. So let's just store a new value in there then. These are our goals to see how useStorage will look like and how we can achieve some simple storage or also caching. And to do that, it's luckily not too complicated. Nitro provides the useStorage composable, which allows us to have access to any kind of storage that's available. And here we can say, okay, we use the storage and say we can set an item to any key we want. So let's say my key here, right? And we set a value, let's say new date. And if we await this and say const item is this, and we await that, then we actually store the item. But now it would be good to say, okay, you know what? What if there is already an item in there, so we don't override it all the time? And of course, we can do the same thing. We can just say, let's get the item out there, get item here. Of course, we don't provide a second value. You could probably divide the default value, but well, we don't need to do that now. Here instead, we say, let's get item as a string. And it is indeed a string because all things here will be serialized. So let's say const possible item is exactly this. And if we say, if there is an item, then how about we just return it? And otherwise, we'll set the new item, and then we should return item. And in this case, well, we could just say like, let's say const now is new date. We do it a bit easier because that won't be returned. We await that, we set now, and then we return it. So this is the first part. Let's see how this actually works by, well, accessing the whole thing in the browser. So in the browser, we want to access /API/storage. And when we do that, we see the following. We see JSON that's returned with just this string. Nice. That looks good. If we refresh it, it will stay the same and the same again. Very nice. Lovely. So this is exactly what we want here. But going back to going back to the code, we want to do a few more things because we had the second part, right? The second part would be if, say the stored thing is old, let's refresh the data. So what we can do here is technically we could say, okay, we either save a bit more than just a string. So we could save a whole object. Let's say, I don't know, type save date. In this case, it's not that interesting because, or say save data. We can say this contains the created at, something like that, which is just a string. But that would be our timestamp here. And then we could say data could be anything in here, right? So we could save data somehow as we want. Maybe just say like, okay, data message, and this should also be a string. So far, so good. What we need next is we now want to ensure that we send the data, type save data. So let's just create some. Let's say const data, save data is, and created at is obviously now. So let's pull the now up here and say this is now, and then data message testing this use storage now. And now just saying we add that here. Then of course we want to create that an ISO string, and then we have our data. So this is what we want to save. And now we can once again type everything. We can say, okay, this is get item save data, and it either exists or it doesn't, right? The key is still the same. Now possible item will be type of save data or not. So we can still return that, and otherwise eventually you want to set that. Also, very important, we usually want to have these getters and setters in a util, so they are all first located together. They can be also all typed with the generics as shown already, and we don't have to, well, write them over and over again. Same idea with the key. So the key should be a constant somewhere, because the key then has a lower chance of actually being a typo and wondering if things don't work. So that is always good to not have any magic strings in your application. Okay, so far so good. Now we just have to find out the refresh mechanism, because right now, if we just run it as is, probably have to restart, because right now, if we take a look at the browser, we still see the old caching entry because we never said we invalidated that, right? So what we can do instead is let's give another key, my extra key that has no entries. And if we now refresh the browser, then we see the right values saying, okay, this is created at, yeah, okay, now wonderful, testing this useStorage now, lovely. Great, okay. And once again, if you would refresh it now, we'll get the same results because we don't do anything else. It's finally time to implement the caching mechanism or the refresh mechanism. So we want to do this and say, okay, we have now, we could set up the data, but instead we can say before we set up the data, we check and get the item, because we only want to set up the data if we actually want to save it and then also return the data eventually here. So what we want to do now, if there is an item, we don't necessarily want to say, okay, yeah, we'll return it. We also want to check. So another thing we can do is with useStorage is we can also clear the storage. But in this case, we don't necessarily need that because we can just say, okay, if there's a possible item, then return it. But if the item is not expired. So how do we figure out if it's expired? Well, in this case, we can say a possible item dot created at, if that exists, right? So if possible item dot created at, let's just say const is expired, or let's say is valid and turn it around. So if it's valid, then created at, and we create a new date out of that. If it exists, right? Otherwise, just do a 0 here. Why not? So if the new date that will be created and is created, if that's smaller, or so if that's more in the past than the current date, which is now, and then we say we want to subtract, let's say 10 seconds or something from that. So we say now, and here as well, we say get time, or yeah, get time might be the easiest. And then here we say now that get time minus 10 times 1000 because we're in milliseconds, right? So here we have the whole thing set up now. And this will help us by doing exactly what we want. We can even go further and say, hey, you know what, 10 seconds is 1000 times 10 or 10 times 1000. So we have that also in a nice way saved. And yeah, now we're here. So the other option now is to say is valid. And if it's valid, then we return it straight away. If it is not valid, then we contain with the things below. So if there's an item and if the item is valid, very lovely, we return the possible item. Before we check the browser, one more thing to do is check the logic once again, because I realized that this here should be the other way around, because you're not checking if it's expired, but if it's valid. So it's only valid if the time in there is actually bigger than the current time minus 10 seconds, but that's okay. So if we take our browser now and refresh it fully, then we'll get a new time because it's saved in memory by default. So all of the things are gone as soon as we save the server and reload things. So now we can refresh, we get the same time again and again, and after 10 seconds or more, we'll get the new time. So in here, the logic is totally coherent and works. Lovely. So we built our own little cache system. The thing is, caching is already included in Nitro as well, without doing much actually. So there are a few other caching functions, but that's a topic for another video, and I'll keep it up. No worries, this will come. But first, let's see what else we can do with useStorage, and maybe it's good to then have a look behind the scenes to figure out what actually powers useStorage. Let's go. One more amazing thing which you can do is you can actually use different storages and also different storage methods. So let's create a new file. Let's say API file.ts. And in here, we create another Nitro event handler and say, you know what, let's use another storage. And we here use the server asset storage that's also documented on the Nitro page. And the idea is that if we use the server asset storage, these files that will be read and saved here and so on, they will be always part of the server bundle. So wherever you upload your application, wherever you deploy it, these files, they will be there. So what we can do now is say, okay, we set an item here, and we could simply say myfile.txt and say, this is the test content. So far, so good. And now nothing happened because, well, we didn't trigger the API route. So let's do that. Let's go into the browser, and instead of API storage, we use API file. And if we hit that, well, you don't see anything because we didn't set any output. We just said, hey, please do this, and that's it. So let's switch back to the code, and we discover something over here to the right. We discover an assets folder, and this assets folder has the my file with the test content in it. Cool, right? And we can do the same also with subfolders. So if we add txt here, and let me quickly trigger the route so you can see what will happen. Then in the server assets folder itself, we add another txt folder with the same thing again. And of course, you can do the same with everything that's savable, right? Like with images, blobs, and so on. That's all good. So there's also another way. Instead of using the server assets, right? We can give whatever we want in here. So we can name our storage as we like foobar. But the problem is that by default, Nuxt and Nitro, they don't know what foobar is, right? So we could define it either in our Nuxt config or when using Nitro standalone in our Nitro config. So here we could say Nitro, and then we say storage. And in here we could say, okay, foobar is a specific driver. So let's say this is file system lite, or we can use the Azure Cosmos or the Azure Key Vault or Cloudflare, the KV store, and so on. There's a long list, right? Let's keep it with FS for now. And of course, if you need something like a Redis or KV, then you can also have other setup options here. So you have also the options to configure your credentials. That's not a problem as well. But how do you know what is actually available, right? Like which drivers there are? Well, the good thing is it's documented, right? So let's jump to documentation and have a look. Nitro itself has a really good documentation about everything it's offering, right? If we go to useStorage, we see a few examples, and most importantly, it's also linking the package that's responsible for how the useStorage works. So in here we have unstorage. Yeah, you see the pattern, right? Once again, another un.js package. And unstorage is actually exactly this, the isolated package related to a storage system for any kind of driver. And the list of drivers is pretty long, because we can actually even use it in the browser with the local storage if we want to, or the session storage. We can use it for like the Netlify blob storage, even a MongoDB storage is possible. Of course, with not the full functionality of something like Mongoose, but it's still working well. A GitHub repository, and yep, I'm not joking, that works as well, and plain HTTP as well. So we can go through the list, say, okay, we have lots of drivers here, but what if we don't? What if we don't find the driver we need? Well, then we can even write a custom driver. And honestly, it's not that complicated. That also happened in Nuxt for the shared pre-runner data feature. If you haven't heard of that, the link to the video is, well, somewhere in the corner and description. Because there, the idea was to have a file system and an LRU cache to get the last recently used items limited to 1,000 to avoid blowing up the memory, but still caching the things on the file system if needed. So there's also a way to just write an own driver, use other drivers as well, and then maybe also your business requirements are fulfilled by that. So all in all, there's some pretty cool features in there, and there's even more to discover. The good thing is all of them have very similar interface with pass item, get item, and so on and so on. So there are lots of good patterns to ensure that even if you want to switch to a different KV store, things will just work out of the box. And unstorage even has an HTTP server powered, so you can have a full file system server with like reading, writing, manipulating on there. If you're interested in that, well, let me know in the comments, maybe I'll make a video about it. But let's jump back to the code and actually see what we can do here. Because now we want to set our wonderful storage here, right? So let's say we have a Redis or in-memory. Sometimes you only have this in the actual production service, right? What if we don't have a Redis here? That's unfortunate, because then it starts with, okay, let's set up a Docker container, let's get Redis up and running, and so on and so on. But there's also one other way. So if we check another option here, it's called dev storage. And the idea of dev storage is similar to what we had with the env config by using $development or $production. If you haven't heard of that, check out the video. Also, as usual, linked. But with dev storage, the idea is to say, okay, this storage is used in prod when it's running, but the dev storage itself, well, this is only running during dev mode. And here we can say, same idea, foobar, but the driver itself is the file system in the meantime, or just in memory. So we don't have to use any complex setup for that, because the interface is the same, so the code doesn't change, and we can still test things easily. And if you might wonder, okay, we have this Redis, how do we connect things? Well, first of all, as I said before, you can write all the things to connect your Redis instance in here, in the config itself, so the Nuxt or the Nitro config. That's one way to do it. And well, the other way, if you say, oh yeah, okay, I can't put in my, password straight away in here, it's tricky, then there's one more option. You can set some defaults here, and then you can create a new plugin. This will possibly change in the future, but right now it's the easiest way. So let's say plugin storage.ts, and this is a Nitro plugin, very important under server. Let's say export default define Nitro plugin. And in here, you would then define your setup. So let's say in here you have the storage. Const storage is useStorage, not useSession. That's for another video. And then you define a driver. So let's say const my Redis driver is the Redis driver. Well, you have to get it from somewhere. So we have to import Redis driver, one of the few things not auto imported, from unstorage itself, and then say drivers Redis. So far so good. That's here we have the Redis driver. It is complaining because we don't have the from here. And here now we can say, okay, the base is my base, and then the host, password, and so on and so on. And then you can say, okay, I can use my runtimeConfig. So runtimeConfig is use runtimeConfig, and then say runtimeConfig dot, I don't know, redis.host, something like that, if you define that. Of course, you need to define that in your Nuxt config again. So have runtimeConfig, say redis host, and this will be directly mapped to the right end variable, which is Nuxt underscore redis underscore host. But this is also in another video. So in the future, as I mentioned, this might not be necessary. We can all do it in the config, but right now it's the easiest. There's just one more thing we have to do. We have to mount the storage because we can already have different storages, and that's one easy way to do this. We just have to mount that and give the whole thing a name. So we name this foobar as we did in the config. That's also where the defaults and this will merge. And that's basically it. Now you know what's powering Nuxt and Nitro's caching system and way more under the hood, and what you can use to read files, save files, and do whatever you want with data around the world. Connect to different KV stores, maybe use a GitHub repository or even an HTTP API and try things out. Please let me know in the comment if there was something unclear, if you want to see something like the unstorage HTTP server thingy, or whatever you cool thing will build with unstorage, and of course also with your Nuxt. And before we stop, and before we go to the Raffler Winners, yeah, I didn't forget, no worries. As I said before, check out the latest Stage Review episode. It's really cool about Nuxt server components and their future with core team member Julian Huang. Give it a go. And now we come to the winners of the raffle.
And we have a couple of contestants, and the wheel to spin will decide now. And here we go. And the lucky winner is... Oh, wow, that's close. M. Kirkland 616. Woohoo! Congrats to that. Congrats for winning. Shoot me an email, shoot me a Discord message, message on X, aka Twitter, wherever. And I will get you in touch, get your ticket, and looking forward to meet you at ViewConf US.
And that's it for the video. As I said, any questions, please put them down below. Stay tuned for next week's video, and I hope to see more people around for ViewConf US. Last but not least, there's still a €50 discount or $50 discount on Nuxt UI Pro, so feel free to snag that. Also, link and coupon code in the description. The only thing left to say is happy hacking and see you soon.